Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm excited to kick off our presentation titled When People Rebel. This is the first of 14 slides, and we'll be exploring how and why people rebel throughout history. We'll look at some key examples and try to understand what drives resistance and change. So, let's dive in and explore this fascinating topic together. Let's take a closer look at the contents of this presentation. We will start with the annexation of Awadh, which was a significant event that marked the expansion of British control. Moving on, the introduction sets the stage for understanding the broader context of these changes. Then, we will discuss the plans to end the Mughal dynasty, highlighting how these efforts reshaped political power in India. We will also examine the loss of power by the Nawabs, which reflects the shifting authority during this period. Next, we'll look at the failed negotiations among ruling families, illustrating the growing tensions and uncertainties. The slide also covers the responses to reforms, showing how different groups reacted to the changing policies. We will explore the relationship between peasants and sepoys, emphasizing the social and military aspects of the unrest. From there, we move to the transition from mutiny to a broader popular rebellion, marking a turning point in the resistance against colonial rule. The section on belief against sea voyages and its impact highlights cultural and psychological factors influencing the uprising. Finally, we will discuss the execution of Mangal Pandey, a key figure whose actions sparked significant events. Throughout this overview, the key themes are power shifts, resistance, and the complex reactions to reform and rule. These points connect to our overall theme of understanding how these pivotal moments led to the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Let's now look at slide 3, which covers the contents of this presentation. We begin with the introduction, setting the stage for the events to come. Moving forward, we'll explore the plans to end the Mughal dynasty, examining the key strategies and turning points. Then, we'll discuss the transition from mutiny to a broader popular rebellion, highlighting how the unrest grew beyond individual soldiers. The next section focuses on the loss of power for the Nawabs, emphasizing the shifting political landscape. We will also cover the events from Meerut to Delhi, including the execution of Mangal Pandey, a pivotal moment that ignited the rebellion. Following that, we'll see how the British Company responded with a series of measures: the backlash, counterattacks, and the appointment of new leaders. The political importance of Bahadur Shah Zafar will be examined, especially how his role symbolized the broader struggle. Then, we'll look at the aftermath, including the arrest of the last Mughal emperor, marking the end of an era. Additionally, we'll touch on the failed negotiations among ruling families and how beliefs against sea voyages impacted the rebellion's spread. The next section will analyze the spread of the rebellion itself, from localized uprisings to widespread unrest. Finally, we'll discuss the long, arduous battles that ensued, responses to reforms, the rise of new leaders, and shifting loyalties that shaped this pivotal period in history. All these points are interconnected, illustrating the complex path from Mughal decline to British dominance. When the East India Company established its power in India, it brought about significant changes in the lives of many groups: Indian kings, queens, landlords, peasants, tribals, and soldiers. Some of these groups, especially the rulers, revolted against the policies imposed by the British. The Nawabs, who had ruled their regions until then, gradually lost all their power and authority. Their influence diminished as British residents were stationed in their courts to monitor proceedings, which undermined their authority. The Nawabs' armies were disbanded, and their freedom was greatly restricted. Additionally, the revenue that the Nawabs collected was taken over by the British, and their territories were seized. Many ruling families, trying to protect their interests, attempted negotiations with the British. For example, Rani Lakshmi Bai wanted the British to recognize her adopted son as the heir after her husband's death. Similarly, Nana Sahib, the adopted son of Peshwa Baji Rao II, sought his father's pension from the British after the Peshwa's death. However, the British refused, mainly because they had the military strength to suppress any revolt. In 1801, A significant event was the imposition of a subsidiary alliance on Awadh. Governor-General Dalhousie declared that the state was poorly governed under Nawab Wajid Ali Shah and decided to take direct British control for better administration. By 1856, Awadh was fully annexed and became part of British territory, one of the last regions to be taken over. Now, talking about the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar II, the last of the Mughal emperors. His story illustrates the decline of Mughal power. In 1849, Dalhousie announced that after Bahadur Shah Zafar's death, his family would be moved out of the Red Fort to a different place in Delhi. Then, after his death in 1857, Governor-General Canning made it clear that his descendants would no longer be recognized as kings, but only as princes. This marked a clear shift. Power was being taken away from the Nawabs and Mughal rulers, consolidating British dominance over Indian territories. As we move to Slide 5, let's discuss the loss of power for the Nawabs. Starting from the mid-18th century, we see a clear decline in the authority and honor that Nawabs and Rajas once commanded. Their influence was gradually eroding over time. One of the key reasons for this was the British presence, as they began appointing residents in many courts. This effectively limited the independence of the Indian rulers and reduced their freedom to govern as they pleased. Additionally, their armed forces were disbanded, which further diminished their power. The British East India Company also took control of their revenues and territories, gradually stripping away their economic and political independence. This process marked a significant shift in the balance of power, setting the stage for direct British control over large parts of India. Understanding this decline helps us see how the British established their dominance, transforming the political landscape of the region. Let's talk about some of the failed negotiations of ruling families with the company. Many of these families tried to negotiate to protect their interests, but unfortunately, they were not successful. For example, Rani Laxmi Bai of Jhansi wanted her adopted son to be recognized as the heir to her kingdom after her husband's death. She believed this was her right to secure her son's future. Similarly, Nana Sahib, who was the adopted son of Peshwa Baji Rao II, sought his father's pension after the Peshwa passed away. Both of these cases show how these families were trying to assert their rights and negotiate with the company, but in each instance, the company refused to grant their requests. These failures highlight the growing tensions and disputes between the ruling families and the company, which played a significant role in the larger context of colonial rule and resistance. Let's now turn to the annexation of Awadh, which is a significant event in our discussion of British expansion. In 1801, the British imposed a subsidiary alliance on Awadh. This meant that Awadh had to accept British military and political oversight while maintaining a nominal ruler. Essentially, it was a way for the British to exert control without direct annexation at that time. Fast forward to 1856, and Awadh was fully taken over by the British. The official reason given was misrule by the Nawab, which was used as a justification to justify the annexation. However, behind the scenes, it was also about consolidating British power and expanding their territorial control. This annexation marked a critical step in the broader pattern of British expansion in India, showing how they gradually took over princely states under the pretext of misrule or other reasons. It also highlights the shift from indirect to direct control, which had profound implications for the region's political landscape. So, this event is a clear example of how colonial interests often masked strategic motives behind seemingly administrative justifications. Now, moving on to the plans to end the Mughal dynasty, it's important to understand how the British gradually dismantled their authority. One significant step was removing the Mughal king's name from the coins, which symbolized the loss of their official recognition and sovereignty. In 1849, Governor-General Dalhousie announced that, after Bahadur Shah Zafar's death, his family would be moved out of the Red Fort. Instead, they would be given a different residence within Delhi, effectively isolating the Mughal family from their former power base. Then, in 1856, Governor-General Canning declared that Bahadur Shah Zafar would be the last Mughal king. This was a clear move to formally end the dynasty's rule. After his death, None of his descendants would be recognized as kings anymore. They would be called princes instead. This marked the definitive end of the Mughal dynasty's political authority and was part of the British strategy to establish full control and reshape the Indian political landscape. This sequence of actions ties into the overall theme of how the British systematically replaced Mughal authority with their own rule. Now let's talk about the peasants and the sepoys. The peasants, as many of you know, were quite unhappy with the high taxes they had to pay. The methods of revenue collection were very rigid and often harsh, making life even more difficult for them. Many peasants had lost their lands they had been tilling for generations, simply because they couldn't repay their loans. This created a lot of frustration and economic hardship among them. On the other hand, the Indian sepoys, who were soldiers in the British Army, also felt dissatisfied. Their pay, allowances, and conditions of service were not meeting their expectations. Moreover, some of the new rules introduced by the British authorities directly conflicted with their religious beliefs and sensibilities. These grievances among both peasants and sepoys highlight the growing discontent against colonial rule. It's important to see how these issues contributed to the larger movement for independence, connecting back to our broader theme of resistance against oppressive systems. On this slide, we're going to explore the belief among Hindus that crossing the sea would lead to losing their religion and caste. This was a deeply rooted fear, and it influenced how they reacted to overseas duties. For example, in 1824, when the British officials told the sepoys to go to Burma via the sea route, they refused. They were willing to go by land instead, even though that was more difficult. But because they disobeyed the orders, they faced severe punishment. Later, in 1856, the British passed a new law that made it mandatory for sepoys to agree to serve overseas if required. This was a significant change because it directly challenged their beliefs and traditions. Most of these sepoys came from rural backgrounds, with families living in villages, and they were deeply connected to their local communities. So, not only were they concerned about their religious beliefs, but they also reacted to what was happening back home in their villages. This resistance and concern about crossing the sea highlight how cultural and religious beliefs influenced the soldiers' responses to British policies. It also shows how these beliefs played a role in shaping the broader resistance to colonial rule. Now, let's look at how the British responded to the social reforms during this period. They took several important steps to change Indian society. For example, they passed laws against the practice of sati, which was a significant social evil where widows would self-immolate on their husbands' funeral pyres. They also introduced laws to promote widow remarriage, encouraging women to rebuild their lives. The British also promoted the English language officially, which was part of their broader effort to modernize and influence Indian society. After 1830, Christian missionaries gained greater freedom. They could operate openly, own land, and spread their faith without restrictions. In 1850, a law was introduced that allowed converts to Christianity to inherit property from their ancestors, making it easier for Indians to convert if they wished. However, these reforms sparked mixed reactions. Many Indians felt that the British were trying to undermine their religion, social customs, and traditional way of life. On the other hand, some Indians supported these reforms because they aimed to eliminate social evils and improve society. So overall, these responses to reform highlight the complex relationship between the British efforts to modernize and the resistance or acceptance it met among Indians. Today, I want to talk about a pivotal moment in Indian history, the transition from mutiny to popular rebellion. The Rebellion of May 1857 was a direct threat to the very existence of the British East India Company's rule in India. It all began in a cantonment in Meerut, where soldiers, or sepoys, rose up against their British officers. But what's remarkable is how this initial uprising quickly spread across a large part of northern and central India. People from different sections of society, including soldiers, peasants, artisans, and even some princes, joined in the rebellion. This wasn't just a military mutiny. It was a widespread movement that challenged colonial authority on many levels. Many historians consider this rebellion as the biggest armed resistance to colonial rule in the 19th century, not just in India, but anywhere in the world during that period. Understanding this event helps us see how deeply rooted the resistance was and how it marked a turning point in India's struggle for independence. It was more than a revolt. It was a fight for dignity and sovereignty, ignited by a shared desire to oppose colonial domination. Now, let's talk about the journey from Meerut to Delhi. This segment of our story highlights a significant transition, both geographically and culturally. As we move from Meerut, we see the movement towards the capital city, Delhi, which has always been a hub of political and social activity. This route is not just a physical journey, but also symbolizes a shift in ideas, aspirations, and the push for change. It's important to understand how this movement contributed to the broader narrative of regional and national development. The route from Meerut to Delhi exemplifies how local events can have a ripple effect, influencing the course of history on a larger scale. This connection underscores the theme of how grassroots movements and local struggles can catalyze larger national movements. Now, let's talk about the execution of Mangal Pandey, a crucial moment in the history of the Indian uprising. Mangal Pandey was a young soldier stationed at the cantonment in Barrackpore. He became a significant figure because of his act of rebellion against the British officers. On 29 March 1857, he was hanged to death for his crime of attacking his officers. This event marked a turning point, highlighting the growing unrest and resistance among Indian soldiers against British rule. It also ignited widespread protests, ultimately fueling the larger rebellion we've been discussing. His sacrifice became a symbol of courage and resistance, inspiring many others to stand up against colonial oppression.